Welcome to the Board of Education and Finance meeting, Thursday, May 20, 2021.
Is your mic on? Mic?
Thank you. Sorry. It was always over here before. Good morning. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, May 20th, 2021. We will begin with the review of the April 2020-21 financial report. Mr. Rudel.
So through April, we are projecting a year-end surplus of $1,125,704. It's pretty much in line with the prior month of $1,146,836. The changes are highlighted. We did have a slight change in some out-of-district tuition expenses of about $30,000. Excess cost, it looks like the reimbursement rate is final at 80.31. So that's a drop of about $13,000 from the last month. We expect to get that last payment in next week. Utilities have trended a little bit higher. That's about $13,000 higher. Out-of-district transportation settlements about $8,000. We received about $1,200 more in Medicaid revenue. Workers' comp reimbursements of $4,300. Nursing substitutes are trending positive, about $6,500. Regular transportation, we did have a remote week in April after spring break, and so that saved a little over $9,000. District legal fees do continue to trend lower in the last quarter, so that's about $24,000 from the previous month. Materials, equipment, and travel is about $15,000. We do have some salary savings from some athletic stipends, a special education central services secretary, and some paraprofessionals for about $34,000. Additional savings in athletic transportation of about $25,000. We have made the decision to cancel the weekend cleaning starting in June. That's saving about $16,750. There will be some transfers recommended, which include covering the food service deficit due to the remote week in April. The change from quarantine from 10 days to 7 days plus contact tracing for $22,500. Additional funds for the director of nursing. A small change in technology equipment, and then salary savings for the lunch monitors due to the remote week in April. The ESSER grant has been received, and we have applied it to 3 elementary teachers, a technician, some facility improvements, PPEs, and technology. Overall, the general education RCs are showing a positive $468,171. Special education RCs are forecasting a positive $759,906, with the majority of that being the additional excess cost money. And then reopening expenditures needing $102,374. Going through the RCs, there really is no change in Darien High School, none at Middlesex, no change at Hindley, no change at Holmes, no change at Oxbridge, no change at Royal or Tokenique. In athletics, as I mentioned earlier, slight favorable balance in interscholastic stipends of $4,147. And then transportation continues to trend favorably by $65,100. And that's a combination of a shortened winter season and then just less routes than a typical year. No change in maintenance. In RC 13, we did release a small amount of money in travel of $1,065, and it's just less itinerant teachers traveling throughout the district. No change in technology. In RC 16, the legal fees are forecasted now at a positive $59,736. The last 3 months of legal fees have trended significantly lower than budget. RC 17 health. Substitutes are forecasted to be about $6,500 under budget. The coverage rate has been better than previous years. No change in RC 18, no change in RC 19 or 20. In RC 23, we did release a small amount of money, $1,500 in consultant services. In RC 24, teacher aides show a favorable balance of $41,881. We have the one para who wasn't needed due to a remote student, and then we had some turnover in a couple other paras that created some salary savings. The principal director salary shows a favorable balance of $4,303. We did have an individual leave the district, and then that position has been replaced, but the timing did result in some salary savings. As I mentioned, tuition private school is forecasted to be a positive $20,637. That is slightly lower than the previous month. And then again, excess cost, it looks like the reimbursement rate will be 80.31%, which means we should receive $2,695,922 or $374,000 more than budget. RC 25, regular transportation, as we mentioned last meeting, we did have the remote week in April after spring break, so that did lead to some additional savings. Electricity shows a favorable balance, been reduced to $24,001, and it's just a little bit of a spike in usage over the last few months, so we did increase our forecast there. RC 26, We have confirmed they're not hiring any additional teacher aides for the end of the year. So that forecast is now a positive $34,343. And then in RC 28, we are forecasting the need for an additional $22,500 for contact tracing to go down from 10 days to 7 days, additional $15,000 for the director of nursing as the COVID compliance officer. We have a positive balance of $16,750 for contract to cleaning. As I mentioned, we're not going to move forward with it in the month of June. And then consultant services, a negative forecast of $98,747. This is a portion of the April cost, and then we're forecasting a portion of the May cost. We assume, based on this and a normal rest of the year, that we will end the year with a fund balance of around 7.5% of typical revenue. If we look back at the last 5 years, the district has been between 1% of revenue as a fund balance and 13%, and the average has been just over 8%. Typically for an agency account, you want to be between 5 and 10%, so we're kind of targeting that middle balance.
Any board questions? Mrs. Ritchie?
Thanks, Rich. I was hoping we could get more detail on the contact tracing number there for the reduced quarantine time.
Yep.
How much staff does that require? How
Sure.
many hours does that? It just seems like a large figure for me.
So it is $2,000 stipend for 6 nurses, the 3 at the high school and then the 3 at the middle school that was discussed. So that's $12,000. $1,500 for each athletic trainer to do additional contact tracing. So that's $3,000. That gets you to $15,000. The nurses are hourly employees, so when they do work over and above their typical day, they do have to be paid hourly or time and a half, and so the $7,500 is the balance for those additional hours.
Mr. Sini?
So, if we're not seeing cases, not only school-wide, but town-wide for now, I don't know when was the last time we reported in a case, so probably 10 days ago or something like that.
28th, maybe? April 28th?
So, I love, again, following board in the ask to go to the 7-day, and thank you for that. But I'm trying to understand, if we're not having cases reported to the district or even the town, how are we incurring expense if we're not contact tracing?
So we haven't incurred the expense yet.
Oh, you budgeted for it, though.
So we're essentially right at that budget right now. So if we don't make a transfer, if we do have additional contact tracing that has to occur between now and the end of the school year, we won't have the funds available within the account to do it. So what we're requesting is that transfer to anticipate potential future cases. If nothing ends up happening for the rest of the school year, then the money doesn't get spent, and then you'll just see a positive balance in the account.
But to Mr. Sini's question, and I don't think any of us, I think all of us are very happy with the 7-day quarantine day period, and appreciative of our nurses. You're talking about the $7,500 piece. The $2,000 stipend you are planning on paying.
Correct, starting next week.
And the trainer stipend,
Starting
regardless
next
if there's additional contract tracing or not.
Correct.
So that represents $15,000 in
Of the 22.5.
of the,
Got
and
it,
then the
okay.
7,500 would be the incremental overtime cost
If
that
we
may or
have
may
any.
not be needed.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Parent, sorry.
Thank you. I'm just curious what the facility improvements that were included in the SR2 grant.
So it was, part of it was plexiglass, some
Right,
of it was
okay.
ventilation and
So
exhaust
none of that was
repairs.
previous capital items that we,
No,
no, it's
so
all
we
new.
did a repair and do
Yeah.
some maintenance on
Okay,
some exhaust
thank you.
fans.
And, sorry,
Nope, go ahead, Mrs. Parent.
do you think that the legal fees, the downward trend will continue?
I think for the rest of the year, barring anything unforeseen, probably. We are holding about $20,000 a month going forward. The last couple of months have been between $4,000 and $7,000. So if, the next month holds at that $4,000 to $7,000, you'll probably see this balance decline or increase in terms of favorable forecast.
Okay, thanks.
So to that question, where are we, has special ed reported in, where are they with their expected PPTs? Because I imagine our schedule is delayed on PPTs just because of COVID.
So PPTs are ongoing currently. Shirley's been having them for probably the last month. We do encumber and we do account for items that we expect to occur. So one of the adjustments here, for example, for tuition, we had earmarked a certain amount of money for a number of students. Those numbers changed a little bit, some positive, some negative. So while you don't get hit with the whole amount, we just have slight adjustments which cause that.
So also with legal, you've predicted
Yep,
as best you can?
as best we can, yep.
Okay. I saw their hands, I'm sorry, Mrs. Ritchie.
So I just wanted to go to the ELP, sorry, the ELP figure. So I just, it sounds like more students have dropped out of the program. Is that common at this point of the year, or is it more driven by COVID?
I don't know if it was driven by COVID or just students leaving the area, but we did have a couple of students that we mentioned in the last month that did withdraw. The reason why, we could probably follow up with Laura, but we did have a couple withdraw.
Okay, so I would just then want to hear about what's going on for fiscal year '22 for that program.
So we did discuss with Laura, registrations are up compared to this year. We would hope they would be up compared to
Right.
this year. There was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning of the year, so we were much lower than normal. But as of right now, they're up.
Okay, so at some point it would be great, to get a more detailed update on that. Thank you.
I saw Mr. Rossini's hand, I thought.
Sarah got my question.
Okay. Mrs. Ritchie?
Well, I don't want to take away you can ask
Well, I was
questions.
just going to ask about cleaning. I appreciate we've had no new cases. What was our decision on June 5th versus running out the end of the year? Was it financial, COVID?
No, it's not financial. It's just reacting to the latest and best information that we're getting, in particular from the Connecticut State Department of Public Health. I just don't see that is, at this point, that level that level of cleaning and the nature we're doing it is not really necessary. And I don't see just spending money on things that aren't necessary, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I will say, when we did give them the announcement that we were looking to sever ties in June, some of the contracted cleaning employees left the organization, so whether or not we have it for that last weekend in May remains to be seen. If we don't have it for that last week in May, you'll see about another $8,000 or $9,000 at the balance in the next one.
Okay. Mrs. Ritchie?
I wanted to just go over the food services for 1 second. So we're going to make that transfer. The board will hopefully approve that transfer in. And then the balance will be 181, you guesstimate or estimate for the start of the next school year.
Correct.
What are the trends are we seeing? It's pretty level now. I mean, we're probably getting more than if we were remote, but we're not seeing any increase. In other words,
May through yesterday, we earned more than the entire month of April.
So people are buying lunch again.
So we were averaging probably about $5,500 a day, which is very low. The month of May is about $7,500 a day, so almost a $2,000 a day increase. It's still not anywhere near where you would want for a normal school year. In a normal school year, you'd want over $20,000 a day. Part of the problem is the kids aren't all eating in the cafeteria.
Right.
So you can only limit the type of options that you can serve the students, because it's got to be able to be delivered to the classroom or maybe the gym, wherever they're eating. You also don't have all the kids coming through the cafeteria where they might end up grabbing a couple extra items here or there, but we've definitely seen an uptick in the amount of purchasing. What really hurt us in the month of April, obviously we had a week of remote school, we had spring break week, and then I think it was April 5th, we had the 2 secondary schools and then Royal that were remote.
That's right.
So you essentially almost lost an entire month of sales. But the month of May has been very, very good. Almost every day we see a new record being set for the number of sales at the high school, middle school. We had one at Oxford's the other day. We had a record. So it's definitely trending in the right direction. But June is also probably not going to be a good month because it's half a month of school. But May has definitely been the best month we've had.
So we're seeing somewhat of a normalization, not
It's
back to what a
definitely getting better.
typical month would look like.
It's definitely
but
getting better.
I guess at some point we should hear what the plan is in terms of operations for the food services for the start of the school year. Are we going to hopefully go back to a more normal food service?
I guess it's sort of tied to this conversation. I will say with the food service that I feel fortunate that we did actually, sorry, coming back to this current, I feel fortunate that we actually did acquire the services before all this happened because they've been very responsive. I will say, just random sample, this just myself talking to kids when I see them in the cafeteria, do you like the food service? That's been a resounding yes. I think we've still to see what they can actually do, but I just want to say too, they've been very responsive organizationally. There's nothing that they won't say no to or yes to. So they've done I feel as they've done a great job for us, and we've yet to see really what they can do. just because of the confinement and the disruptions. But to answer your question, as I've mentioned at the board meeting last week,
Sorry.
that's okay. As I mentioned at the last board meeting, intend to fully open it in as normal a situation as I can, which at this point would include a normal cafeteria environment. At this point, I'm not planning to spill over to gymnasiums.
Okay, great. And can you just speak a little bit to why we keep this at about 7.5%? I mean, I know it's our average, but if people are wondering why we're transferring large amounts of money into this account.
So it is an agency account. It's intended to be self-sufficient. So typically you see a large cash draw in the month of August because you're buying all that food, you're getting ready to prep the kitchens. So you usually have a negative balance to start the year because kids haven't come in yet, they haven't started buying. Additionally, you want to have a little bit of money in case a large piece of equipment fails, whether it's a refrigerator or a stove or something like that, because you don't want to actually interrupt operations. Really, the last thing we want to get to in a normal year is where the operating budget has to subsidize the food service budget. We do see that in districts like Greenwich, for example. They've had to subsidize their food service operation for a number of years. So having that 7.5% gives you the ability, A, to cover that cash draw in the beginning of the year, but also in case you have any unintended failures of equipment, that you're not going to have a hiccup in terms of serving the students. We have the program prior to moving to Chartwell, as well as trending towards a negative financial result. It was one of the reasons why we decided to change. I think going into next year, we've talked about having additional sources of revenue go in. They've done some catering. They've done some catering for PD days, for example, and it looks like they'll probably take over the pavilion by Darien High School, by the football field, by the stadium field. Their hope is to kind of turn it into some offerings that you would see at like a professional sports event, whether it's like Yankee Stadium or Citi Field. So they're trying to come up with some creative menus for that.
Hopefully not at their prices, but
So just one more question on that, if that's okay. Typically, we do carry a higher balance, so I just want to make sure you're comfortable with that number starting off the school year, given the fact that the kitchens probably haven't been as fully utilized as they normally would be.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure you're comfortable with that, because I do, as I look back at the prior years, it does seem we usually have a much higher balance to start the school year.
So in fiscal 16, you actually hit a low of $37,000 as a fund balance. So it's just over 1% of typical sales, which would be very low and certainly not something you'd want to carry. You've been as high as 300,000 of sales.
How high was that percentage-wise?
13%. So
So you're right in the middle.
you're kind of right in the middle. So at 180,000, you're more than secure, providing any type of catastrophe like schools shutting down for the year or something like that. But at 7.5%, you should be good.
Great, thank you.
All right, any more board questions?
I do.
Oh, Mrs. Ritchie.
I just wanted to go over to the account reconciliation page, and I just was hoping you could give us a little more detail on that movement of $25,000 related to, I guess, contracted PT. Is that something we should be concerned about, because
Nope.
it seems like a large dollar amount?
No concerns. It's really just a shift in terms of where they needed their resources. Obviously, we plan a budget more than a year in advance, and so sometimes you have to be a little bit agile and move money from one account to another to meet those resources, but it's no concern in terms of an overall shortfall.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a good point Mrs. Ritchie brings up, because I've been watching this PT-OT line all year and money go back and forth. I just say I think we should continue to watch it. I know we proposed a cut and then the board restored the funds for next year, but it seems like these two funds, maybe just because of student need to be more nimble.
So it wasn't a cut that was proposed. We do go against revised budget. So when you go against revised budget, you haven't cut the funds, you've reallocated it to another account. And so that's what was reflected in the budget.
Yeah, so we often reallocate, I guess is the best way for me to say, between these two accounts. So I'm just saying, I think maybe if we continue to follow the detail, both for, your finance office and this, as we look at these numbers, because those two accounts seem to need to be very nimble.
As they are in almost every district.
Any other questions? We'll move on to the reopening of school projected expenditures.
So we are projecting a total spend, including grants, of $3.6 million. There have been transfers that have been approved of $688,878. We did receive the supplemental appropriation of $1,788,130. The total grants is just under 1.1 million, so that does create that negative balance of 102,375. It is the $98,000 proposed transfer for the school lunch program. It is the $15,000 proposed transfer for the director of nursing, the $22,500 for contact tracing. But we do have some positive areas, which include some salary savings and part-time custodians, the lunch monitors, the lunch staff, and then again, the weekend cleaning.
Any questions? Why are our lunch monitors down at the moment? It says that we've had less.
So they're hourly employees, and we only need them when school's in session. So when school is remote, like the week in April, we don't have to pay them.
Yep.
So that savings is really directly correlated with days we've had remote days.
Okay, so we would expect it to be back on budget for this month since we've
So
been
yeah,
open.
so assuming we don't close and there's no remote days, you would expect to be back on
Okay,
budget.
thank you. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to budget transfers 2020, 2021.
So there are 3 transfers for consideration. The first transfer is $98,747, and that is to cover the deficit in the school lunch program due to the remote days. We are recommending taking it from savings that were generated due to COVID, which includes interscholastic transportation for $65,100, interscholastic officials for $25,970, and then regular transportation for $7,677. The next transfer is for $22,500 for contact tracing to go from 10 to 7 days, $6,500 from a better trend in nurse substitutes, and then again savings in regular transportation due to diesel savings. And then the final transfer is COVID to COVID, but we did want to include it. It's $15,000 for the director of nursing, and we would recommend taking it from the savings in the contracted cleaning account.
Questions on transfers? Okay, well, we will move on to fiscal year 2021-22 ESY.
So as Shirley mentioned at the last board meeting, we have an increased number of students who are planning to attend ESY. To give some background, the budget for next year for ESY is set at $1,063,635, plus an additional $141,220 for transportation. The increase in the budget was primarily due to the number of days and then contractual increases for the different bargaining units. So ESY does begin June 28th, which means 3 days of ESY gets expensed into the current year at the fiscal year 21 rates, and then the balance of days gets expensed in the fiscal 22 at the fiscal 22 rate. So when looking at the staff members, it looks like we will need 18 additional paraprofessionals, 3 additional teachers. However, it looks like there'll be 3 fewer psychologists and 3 fewer OT staff members. On net, we're anticipating this to be an increase of about $71,000. And then it looks like we will need an additional bus to accommodate some of those students, which we are anticipating being about $14,000. In total, the increase would be about $85,000. Shirley did mention at the previous board meeting, the state has awarded us a grant for ESY of $20,000, which can be used to offset the costs associated with ESY. So netting that $20,000 against the $85,000 would bring us down to about $65,000. So we are anticipating potentially recommending that $65,000 of additional money go to the American Rescue Grant, which would satisfy a portion of the 20% threshold for learning loss.
Questions? Mrs. Ritchie?
Just so I'm clear, some of the expenses will be in fiscal year 21, even though it's not. Do we prorate that? So in other words, like basically do an income statement for each of those days, and
Yep.
Would there be any transfer then related to those days that are in fiscal year 21?
So because it doesn't start after July 1st, we do have to expense a portion of that this year because there's different contractual rates given on the year. So we do track it day by day. So it will go in those accounts that I mentioned. We're not anticipating having to do any adjustment into that account. The ESY that occurred last year, which was virtual, was slightly less than we expected. So you have some savings there, which
Okay.
factor into this budget, which will help offset some of the costs this year.
So are all of our PPTs as related to ESY that we can predict completed at this point?
That I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I know we're on track. If it's the same answer, it may not be the same answer, depending on the nature of the question. Are they all done for the year? I know we're on track, whatever that schedule is usually.
So behind my question is, if we had more students identified, we would just need to plan for additional expenses.
Correct.
So when, I'm sorry to jump in, but when would we have those final numbers of participants?
Anywhere up to June 27th, I think,
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so we have 111 additional students, which gives us how many students total in ESY?
About 360,
About that.
369, 370, or 369 or something.
And so if
Assuming
we-
they all come.
And so roughly, if my numbers are still correct, we have about 4,000 students in special education. So 300, like, I'm just trying to figure out our percentage, I mean, sorry, not $4,000, 4,000, I can't speak, I'm sorry. Yeah, what I'm looking for is our percentage of special education students that are participating in ESY.
You're basically trying to get a trend relative to other years, if we're on track, ahead, or.
Yes, and we're clearly ahead,
You're
which is
ahead.
fine, but in terms of recovery service, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you, Mr. Sini. Any other questions on ESY before I have a few more?
And I guess, to Alan's point, you know, through this point, you're running on budget, if you will,
Yes,
based on
yes.
what you're seeing. So now you're just forecasting whatever percentage is left in the assessments, okay?
So 2 questions. Why would we do why this bucket for the American Rescue Grant?
So one of the preferred items of the American Rescue Grant is summer school or ESY or summer enrichment. So it does satisfy one of the primary target areas of the grant.
Okay, and do we have any concerns, or do we feel like we will have enough support should we identify more recovery services through September, October, and November?
Well, at the moment, we're projecting what we think we will need and will be helpful, but September, October, November, well, yeah, I think the answer to that would be yes, in terms of, yes.
Based on what we know.
Yeah,
At this point.
yeah.
So July 1, how much of a deficit are we opening with?
Well, so it depends.
I love that answer.
Wait, are you talking about ESY?
Overall.
So overall.
I mean, ESY is a
Beyond
piece of it,
overall,
right?
The whole budget, or just not special education, or the whole budget?
Well, we can take both, special
Okay.
education and then the whole budget.
So currently, the only unidentified funds that we have for next year is the middle school principal, who will be staying for an additional 3 months, so that overlap. There could be a number of ways in which that's covered, whether or not we have additional salary savings, whether or not you have additional turnover, but that's the only current cost that's known that we don't have a budget for.
And yet,
Mr. Sini?
and as you explained before, you will have the dollars to cover, it's just where it comes from within the budget.
Correct, so we get appropriated the $106 million on day one. We obviously don't spend all $106 million on day one. So there's no cash deficit, but there's no budget associated
Yeah,
with
I'm
just those
asking the
3 months.
budgeted question.
Yeah.
Mr. Sini?
Yeah, can we go back to ESY, and just touching upon one of your questions, maybe you can explain the philosophy of using grants versus, tax dollars, if you will.
Sure.
And I guess in this, let's just stick to this agenda item, but maybe that's something we can discuss at a broader board discussion.
So you certainly don't have to use the grant. Typically, you wouldn't use a grant for extended school year. What we are seeing across at least Lower Fairfield County is an increase in the number of students who are attending ESY. You're also seeing a number of school districts just offering not just ESY summer school, but almost like credit recovery summer school. And a lot of those districts are expected to use the American Rescue Grant for that. So it's a pretty similar method that other districts are using. We do have the ability to essentially redo the American Rescue Grant every 6 months. So if we decide at some point maybe things are trending favorably and we don't want to put it to the American Rescue Grant, we have the ability to do that.
And I guess what I was getting at is there, from your expertise, is there a practice where when the dollars are available from, like, let's just say the grant bucket, you go there first before then you?
So it depends on what you're going to spend it for. So so the American Rescue Grant, as an example, is a non-recurring source of revenue. They infuse you your money, You have to spend it by a certain time and then it goes away. It's always better to use non-reoccurring sources of revenue for non-reoccurring expenditures if, whenever possible, so that you use reoccurring sources of revenue for reoccurring expenditures. I think it's a little bit of a little different this year because the intention of the American Rescue Grant is to bring schools back up to speed with the expected loss of what happened over the last year plus. So a lot of districts are looking to use that for also reoccurring sources of expenditures.
Yeah, and if I, just one more follow-up, like, and that's, I think you touched upon that. Like, we're ahead of the curve when you compare to a lot of inner city schools and such in return. So you're finding best to use these funds, and I appreciate the description of non-recurring versus non-recurring, recurring versus recurring. So I appreciate
There's certainly a lot of criteria that come out that either apply to a school district or do not apply to a school district.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that do not, I won't say don't apply to us in terms of consideration, but just our current status of where we are in those categories and what our needs are. And so as far as the grant goes, any grant goes, whatever our needs are, whatever the needs of the district are, the kids or otherwise, I would put that on the table for the grant. But there's also fiscal decisions that the board makes within the bigger financial context with them that you are working.
Mrs. Ritchie.
So just back to fiscal year 22, we're seeing this big jump in ESY. Do we have a sense if those are going to be continuing into the next fiscal year? In other words, at this point we might not even know that, but some of these students may remain in ESY next fiscal year as well. So I think that's just something I'm flagging, that it might not be just a temporary one-year occurrence. And my other thing that I'm a little concerned with is putting FTEs into a grant when we have a pretty good sense that they're going to be more than just a one-year occurrence, because this is a 3-year grant and we could have expenses in year 2 and year 3 of the grant. And then if we capture a full-time employee that's going to be a permanent presence in the district, I do have concerns about putting those into the grant. I just wanted to voice that.
And just to be clear, you're talking ESY, right?
No, just in general.
So,
Well,
a little
yeah,
off topic now.
Yeah, but I think
Well, we
in the
did segue to it. It's in the part of the discussion.
I think in the broader context, what we're looking at is like, and maybe that needs to have a broader discussion at the board table about how we utilize grant funds. I think for ESY, maybe the right way to reframe it slightly is, since we hire them year over year for that particular program, do we anticipate a yearly expenditure each summer around here? It would be hard to know that at this moment, given PPTs. But I do think what is interesting, do we have any data, given that we're looking at about, $100,000 over budget? Do we have any idea broadly if these are retention or regression issues? Because regression issues, we need to meet. If it's a retention issue or a learning loss, I think the board might need an update, because we've heard different things. This is very individualized. I recognize that, the individual needs of students, but if there's any broad information, because I think that will help the board understand best kind of what's going on in terms of how to allocate funds. If we see that there are maybe pockets of learning loss, that would help us plan, or there are larger groups we can identify. If this is just a matter of retention and not wanting kids out of a school setting again, that might be very different. So maybe if you or Shirley could speak to the board about that, that would help us plan financially and decide whether these are reoccurring or non-reoccurring expenses, and then best know how to expend money surrounding it.
Again, are we talking ESY? I just want to make sure.
Yes, ESY.
But we're
Specific
looking at,
to ESY, we're 101 children over.
Right.
Or 111 children over. So we've heard that we don't think there's significant learning loss. We're also seeing an increase in students who need to be in school in the summer based on IEP planning. So what I'm asking, are there any broad categories that we should be aware of?
Yeah.
Maybe it's literacy, maybe it's OTPT issues that would help us plan.
But we won't, to their point, we won't know if they're recurring until we get well through the next fiscal school year, 22, correct? Is that what I heard earlier?
Well, in practice, yes.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
practice, in terms of reoccurring, non-reoccurring, I'm looking for trends.
Yeah.
I'm looking for trends to say, if what we're saying is the way that we are budgeting is for a non-learning loss environment, and yet we are enrolling more children for concerns of learning loss versus we're concerned of regression over the summer, which is a different educational paradigm, that would help us plan and know kind of how to spend this money. and plan into the forward as we all of a sudden are presented either educational presentations or financial presentations.
So that's something the board should ask for.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, okay, if someone can give us some color on ESY, that would help us present to the board or help the administration present to the board what they think, how to explain. This is a large jump. 111 kids
Yes, it
is a
is.
large
Yes,
jump.
yes, it is.
So, and it's a, you know, I think everyone here is committed to spend the money for these kids. We just want to know kind of what's going on. I think it permeates all of our work. Any other questions on ESY? Okay. Any public comment?
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participant's icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
Thank you. With that, can I entertain a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Parent and Mr. Sini, all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.